Ethan and Lila stood in the quiet apartment, the morning light spilling across the floor, turning every ordinary object into something different, as if time itself had slowed down to let them face the truth. The tension between them was palpable, not loud or dramatic, but heavy in a way that made breathing feel slightly more difficult. Neither of them spoke at first, both trying to gather the words that had been unsaid for hours, maybe even years. Ethan's heart was racing, but not with anger. It was a mix of fear, hope, and uncertainty. He wanted to hear her voice, to understand her, and at the same time, he feared what he might hear. Finally, Lila broke the silence. "You heard what I said?" she whispered, almost as if saying it aloud would make it real. Ethan nodded slowly, the words heavy but necessary. "Yeah," he said quietly, his voice steady, controlled, though inside he felt raw. There was a pause, a long, heavy pause where both of them simply looked at each other. Ethan's mind was full of questions, but the most important one was the one he couldn't voice yet. Did she still want this life with him? Did she still love him enough to face this uncertainty together? Lila's eyes welled up, not with guilt, but with honesty, with vulnerability. "I wasn't saying I don't love you," she said softly, her voice shaking just a little. "I was scared." Ethan frowned slightly, trying to understand. "Scared of what?" he asked, his tone gentle, careful, not wanting to push too hard, not wanting to shatter the fragile moment. Lila looked down for a second, taking a deep breath. "Scared of changing everything. Scared of losing myself in this. I didn't want to hold back, but I didn't know how to be honest without hurting you." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. It wasn't what he expected. He had imagined anger, betrayal, maybe confrontation, but not this. This was real, human, fragile, and it demanded a response that was thoughtful, that respected the honesty she was offering. He stepped closer, though carefully, leaving space but bridging the distance that had grown overnight. "Why didn't you tell me earlier?" he asked, his voice low. "Because I didn't understand it myself," she replied immediately, almost like a shield falling away. "I didn't know what I was feeling until last night. I needed to face it alone to understand what it really meant." The honesty hung in the air between them, heavy but freeing. Ethan took another slow breath, letting himself process the weight of her words. He realized that her fear didn't mean she didn't love him. It didn't mean she was uncertain about their life together. It only meant she was human, vulnerable, unsure, and needing to find herself in the midst of a big change. That realization softened something deep inside him. The tightness in his chest eased just a little, replaced by a mix of relief and cautious hope. "I don't want to lose you," he said finally, his voice breaking the silence in a way that felt almost dangerous in its intensity. "But I also don't want you to feel like you have to lose yourself for us. We can figure this out together." Lila's eyes widened slightly, and a small, almost tearful smile appeared. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and nodded. Together, she repeated the word carrying weight, promise, and understanding all at once. Ethan took her hand gently in his, holding it in a way that said he wasn't going anywhere, that he could wait, that he could be patient. The morning stretched around them, still quiet, but different now. Each breath felt lighter. They moved to sit on the couch, still holding hands, still close, but not rushing anything. The apartment, which had felt heavy and unfamiliar before, now carried a sense of tentative hope. They didn't speak much at first, just letting the silence settle, letting it carry the weight of the night's revelations. Every small sound, the ticking clock, distant cars, the hum of the refrigerator felt part of their shared experience now. Part of the fragile peace they were beginning to build. Ethan thought about their wedding. The plans, the invitations, the guests. All of it felt secondary now. The important thing wasn't the day or the ceremony. It was the life they were building, the understanding they were starting to reach, the honesty they were committing to. Lila looked up at him, searching his eyes for the answer he didn't even know he was giving her. And Ethan realized that sometimes love wasn't about perfection. Sometimes it was about patience, understanding, and facing uncertainty together. Hours passed and they talked. Slowly at first, almost cautiously. Lila explained more about what she had felt over the past weeks, about her fears, about the pressure she had put on herself. Ethan listened, sometimes asking gentle questions, sometimes just holding her hand and letting her speak. Each word, each pause built something stronger than anything they had felt before. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cinematic, but it was real. It was them. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he could breathe again. They laughed lightly at small things, inside jokes. Memories from past dates, moments that had seemed trivial but now carried weight. The laughter was quiet, not forced, and it felt like a release of the tension that had built overnight. Ethan realized that trust wasn't broken. It had just been tested. And sometimes, tests didn't have to end in failure. Sometimes they ended in growth. By midday, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The apartment no longer felt heavy. The sunlight was warmer now, filling the room with brightness that matched the subtle lift in their spirits. Ethan and Lila moved around naturally, preparing coffee together, tidying small things, speaking in soft tones. There was still uncertainty, yes, but there was also connection. There was honesty. There was love. They discussed the wedding openly, carefully, making the decision to postpone it by a few weeks. Not because they doubted their love, but because they wanted to ensure that the day reflected who they truly weren't. Just a celebration of commitment, but a celebration of understanding, patience, and partnership. The choice felt right. It felt mature. And it felt theirs. Ethan watched Lila as she spoke about her plans, about ideas for the wedding that now included their shared vision rather than just traditions or expectations. Her eyes sparkled with excitement again. Not the careless joy of a party, but the deep, meaningful joy of someone who finally felt understood and safe. Ethan felt his heart swell. He realized that love wasn't just about certainty. It was about being there through doubt, through fear, through quiet moments of reflection. It was about choosing each other over and over again, even when things were hard. Later, they sat on the couch again, holding hands, facing each other in a quiet, shared space. Ethan thought about the night before, about the video, about the fear and confusion that had almost overwhelmed him. And then he realized something important. That night hadn't ended their story. It had begun a new chapter. A chapter filled with honesty, communication, and deeper understanding. They were still in love, still committed. But now stronger because they had faced the truth instead of hiding from it. Lila leaned against his shoulder lightly, and Ethan rested his head against hers. They didn't need to speak. Words were unnecessary. Their closeness, their quiet presence, said everything. The mistakes of misunderstanding, the fears of uncertainty, the hidden thoughts, all of it was acknowledged, accepted, and now woven into the story they were creating together as the day moved forward. Ethan felt a sense of calm he hadn't known he could feel so soon after turmoil. There was hope, yes, but more importantly, there was clarity. Lila was by his side, fully present, fully honest, and he realized that sometimes love didn't need perfect moments or perfect timing. It needed truth. It needed patience. It needed courage. By evening, they were making plans for a simple walk outside, quiet dinner, and conversations that would continue late into the night. The bond between them had shifted from fragile to resilient. The morning had been heavy with fear and uncertainty, but now it was filled with intention, understanding, and commitment. They had faced a shadow together, and it hadn't destroyed them. Instead, it had made them stronger. Ethan reflected on the lessons of the past night. He understood now that fear wasn't a signal to leave. It was a signal to pause, to listen, to understand. Lila's honesty, though terrifying at first, had been a gift. It allowed them to see each other fully, without pretense, without assumption. And in that truth, they had found a new kind of loved one that could survive doubt, uncertainty, and imperfection. As the stars began to appear in the evening sky, Ethan and Lila sat together on the balcony, their hands intertwined. They didn't need grand words or declarations. The world outside continued in its usual rhythm, but inside their shared space, Time had a different flow, slower, calmer, deliberate. They were learning to navigate love with patience, honesty, and trust, and for the first time, both felt that the future, while uncertain, was theirs too shaped together, and in that quiet, shared moment, Ethan realized that sometimes the truth doesn't end a love story. Sometimes it sets it free. It opens the door to understanding, growth, and the kind of connection that lasts beyond fleeting fears. The wedding might be postponed, the plans might shift. But what they had, no honesty, trust, and mutual respect, was unshakable. They stayed there for a long time, watching the night deepen, talking softly, laughing lightly, holding each other as the world moved on outside. Daniel noticed the shift before he understood it. It was one of those quiet evenings that should have felt perfect. The restaurant was softly lit, the kind of place where people spoke in low voices and everything felt warm and calm. A slow song played somewhere in the background, blending with the sound of glasses clinking and quiet laughter. Across the table sat Alina, looking beautiful in a simple way that had always drawn him in. Her hair rested lightly over her shoulders, and her smile came easily, just like it always had. If someone looked at them from a distance, they would have thought this was a couple deeply in love, sharing a peaceful night together. And maybe that was what made everything that followed feel so strange. Daniel had planned this evening carefully. It wasn't a special date, not an anniversary or a celebration, but he wanted it to feel meaningful. Lately, life had been busy, and they hadn't had time to slow down. He thought this dinner would bring them closer again. He wanted to remind her and himself of what they had built together. As he watched her laugh at something he said, he felt a small sense of relief. Maybe everything was still the same. Maybe he was just overthinking things like he sometimes did. But then, something small happened. At first, it didn't even seem important. A man approached their table. He looked confident, the kind of person who moved like he belonged wherever he went. He smiled politely, apologizing for the interruption, and said something casual to Alina. Daniel didn't catch the first words, but he noticed the way Alina reacted. Her expression changed, not in a bad way, but in a way that felt different. She laughed a little louder than before and leaned slightly forward, giving the stranger her full attention. Daniel sat back in his chair, watching. He told himself it was nothing. People talk. It happens. There was no reason to feel uncomfortable. But still, something in his chest tightened, just slightly. He couldn't explain why. It wasn't jealousy exactly. It was more like a quiet alert, something telling him to pay attention. The conversation continued. The man made another joke, and Alina laughed again. This time, her hand brushed lightly against the table as she leaned closer. It was such a small detail, but Daniel noticed it. He noticed everything now. The way her eyes stayed on the stranger. The way she didn't glance back at Daniel, even once, as if he wasn't sitting right there. "Where are you from?" the man asked. "Here," Alina replied, smiling. "Well, mostly." Daniel tried to stay calm. He picked up his glass, took a sip, and told himself to relax. This was normal. There was nothing wrong with talking. Nothing wrong with being friendly. He didn't want to be the kind of person who made a scene over something so small. But then the moment stretched longer than it should have. The man didn't leave. Instead, he pulled out his phone, still smiling, and said something that made Alina laugh again. Daniel couldn't hear every word, but he saw what happened next clearly. Alina reached for the phone for a second. Daniel thought maybe she was just looking at something. A photo, a message, anything. But then she started typing. His heart skipped. "What are you doing?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Alina didn't look up right away. "Relax," she said lightly. "He just asked for my number." Daniel stared at her. "And you're giving it to him?" he asked now. She looked at him, almost amused. "Oh, don't be dramatic," she said, her tone playful but dismissive. "It's just harmless flirting." Harmless. The word echoed in Daniel's mind. He didn't respond. He couldn't. He just watched as she handed the phone back to the man, smiling like it was nothing. The man thanked her, gave Daniel a polite nod, and walked away as if everything that had just happened was completely normal. but it didn't feel normal. Not to Daniel's. Silence settled over the table. But it wasn't the comfortable kind. It felt heavy, like something invisible had been placed between them. Alina picked up her drink and took a sip, acting as if nothing had changed. "You're overthinking," she said casually. "It didn't mean anything." Daniel forced a small nod. "Yeah," he said, though his voice didn't sound like his own. He tried to move on. He really did. He asked her about her day, about work, about anything that could bring the conversation back to something familiar. And Alina responded easily, talking like she always did, smiling like everything was fine. But Daniel couldn't stop thinking about it. It wasn't just that she gave her number to another man. It was how easily she did it, how natural it seemed, how she didn't even hesitate. And the way she dismissed his reaction, like his feelings didn't matter. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Daniel said the right things at the right moments, but his mind was somewhere else. Every time Alina smiled, he wondered if that same smile had been given so freely to someone else before. Every time she looked at him, he searched her eyes for something he couldn't quite define. When they finally left the restaurant, the cool night air hit his face, but it didn't clear his thoughts. They walked side by side, their shoulders occasionally brushing, just like always. From the outside, nothing had changed. But inside, everything felt different. Later that night, they sat together on the couch. Alina leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder like she always did. Her presence was warm, familiar, comforting in a way that should have made everything better, but it didn't. "You're quiet," she said softly. "Just tired." Daniel replied. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You're still thinking about earlier, aren't you?" Daniel hesitated. He didn't want to argue. He didn't want to ruin the night even more. But he also couldn't pretend everything was fine. "I just didn't expect it," he said honestly. Alina sighed gently, as if she had already explained this too many times. "It was nothing, Daniel. Just a conversation. People flirt. It doesn't mean anything." "It meant something to me," he said quietly, for a moment. She didn't respond. Then she reached for his hand, her touch soft and familiar. "You trust me, right?" she asked, her voice gentle now. Daniel looked at her. He wanted to say yes without hesitation. He wanted to feel that certainty, that calm belief that nothing was wrong. But something held him back. Still, he nodded. "Yeah," he said. Alina smiled, satisfied, and rested her head back on his shoulder. "Then don't worry about it," she murmured. Daniel wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. But as the room grew quiet and the night stretched on, his mind refused to rest, because trust wasn't something you could force, and doubt, once it entered, didn't leave easily. Later, as Alina fell asleep beside him, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The room was dark, the silence deep. But his thoughts were loud. He replayed the moment, again and again. Her laughter, her words, the way she didn't even think twice before giving her number. He tried to convince himself it didn't matter. That she was right. That it was harmless, but if it was so harmless, why did it hurt? Why did it feel like something important had shifted? Daniel turned his head slightly, looking at Alina as she slept peacefully beside him. She looked the same, calm, unbothered, as if nothing had happened. And maybe, to her, nothing had. But to him, it felt like the beginning of something he couldn't yet understand. Something quiet, something slow, something that didn't break everything at once, but started to change it piece by piece, and his sleep finally began to pull him under. One thought stayed with him, clear and heavy. Maybe the real problem wasn't what she did. Maybe it was how little it seemed to matter to her. Daniel had been feeling the distance grow for weeks, but nothing prepared him for the clarity that came one afternoon. He had gone out to run errands, walking down a quiet street lined with small cafes and shops. The sunlight warm on his shoulders. As he passed a corner cafe, he stopped without fully realizing why. There she was, Alina. She was sitting across from the man from that night at the restaurant. The same man, same easy smile, same comfortable posture. They were leaning slightly toward each other, talking, laughing, sharing that small closeness that felt intimate even from a distance. Daniel froze. The sight made his chest tighten, but he didn't move. He didn't step inside. He didn't shout or confront. He simply watched. And in watching, the truth hit him like a sudden wave. It wasn't harmless. It wasn't innocent. It was real. And it had been happening quietly all along. He felt a strange mix of emotions. Not anger at first, not really. Shock, confusion, a sharp ache in his chest. How had he missed it? How had he allowed himself to believe it was just a moment, a misunderstanding, a harmless joke? The realization made his heart pound, but he stayed still. He didn't want to ruin the scene, didn't want to make a spectacle. He simply absorbed the moment, committing it to memory, knowing it was a turning point. The way they leaned in, their shared laughter, the unspoken comfort between them all screamed that something existed beyond what he had been told. Beyond the smiles and reassurances she had given him, Daniel walked slowly away from the cafe, letting the scene fade behind him, but the image stayed in his mind. He didn't text her that night. He didn't call. He didn't confront her. Instead, he sat alone at home, letting his thoughts run freely. He remembered the first time she had given her number away. The dismissive words, the casual laughter, the insistence that it was nothing. He thought about the repeated moments, the growing signs he had ignored because he wanted to trust her. And now the pieces fell together. It wasn't a single act, it was a pattern. And that pattern had been unfolding while he clung to the hope that everything was fine. When Alina came home that evening, Daniel was waiting quietly. She entered, humming softly, like every evening was the same, like nothing had changed. She noticed him immediately. "Hey," she said, setting down her bag. Her smile was soft, familiar, but Daniel could see the tension in her posture. He had changed the air around him, though he hadn't moved. He simply stood there, calm, steady. And somehow different from the man she had been used to seeing. "Hey," he replied softly. His voice was even controlled. But inside, a storm was building. "I saw you today," he said, his eyes steady on hers. Alina froze. Her lips parted slightly, the casual composure faltering for just a fraction of a second. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously. "I saw you." "At the cafe?" he said simply. "With him?" Alina blinked, not expecting the confrontation. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "Daniel, she started, her voice faltering. He didn't interrupt. He simply waited, letting the weight of his words settle. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to accuse. He only needed to let her see that he knew, that the illusion of ignorance was gone, that the truth was now in the open. "It's nothing," she said quickly, a reflex. "We were just talking." "I didn't." Daniel shook his head slowly. Just don't say it's nothing." "I understand now." She looked down, her fingers twisting slightly. For the first time in weeks, she didn't smile, didn't try to dismiss the situation with a joke or a playful remark. She was quiet, facing the reality of what had happened. The room felt heavy, charged with unspoken truths. It's the kind that can't be ignored or smoothed over. Daniel stepped closer, but not in anger. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to make a scene. He simply looked at her, letting his eyes convey what words couldn't. "I trusted you," he said softly, each word deliberate. "I believed in us, and I think maybe that was my mistake." Alina's eyes filled with something new. Regret, guilt, a soft ache that he had never seen before. She opened her mouth, tried to speak, but no words came out at first. The silence stretched between them, heavy but honest. Finally, she whispered, "I didn't mean for it to go this far." Daniel nodded slowly. He felt the weight of her words, but they didn't relieve the hurt. Instead, they confirmed it. He understood she hadn't planned to break their trust, hadn't planned to cause this pain. But intention didn't erase the pattern, didn't erase the choices she had made. It was small, cumulative, undeniable, and it had changed everything. For a moment, neither of them moved. Daniel's mind replayed every small act, every casual word, every instance where she had dismissed his concern. He thought about the way he had held his tongue, the way he had tried to believe, the way he had rationalized and ignored the signs. And now it was all clear. He realized that sometimes love isn't destroyed by a single act. It fades slowly, quietly, in the spaces where honesty should have been. He took a deep breath. The air felt heavy but grounding. "I can't pretend anymore," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I can't ignore the truth. Not for myself. Not for us." Alina's eyes filled with tears and she reached for his hand. "Daniel, please. I never wanted to hurt you." He let her hand rest in his for a moment, not pulling away, but not holding on tightly either. He needed clarity. He needed to understand that moving forward would require more than apologies. It required change, real change that had never come. And in that stillness, he realized he had already made his choice. Not in anger, not in revenge, but in quiet, unwavering self-respect. "I know," he said finally, "but knowing isn't the same as forgetting and trusting. I can't do that anymore. Not like before." Alina shook her head slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please, Daniel, we can fix this. We can know," he said softly but firmly. "Not like this. Not with the small choices that led us here." He stepped back slightly, giving both of them space. The room felt suddenly larger, emptier, the quiet almost reverent. "I loved you," he said. "But love isn't enough when honesty is missing. And it hasn't been enough for a long time." She reached out one more time, but he didn't take it. He let the hand fall, understanding that some things couldn't be mended with a touch or a word. They had passed a line not with a single act, but with the accumulation of quiet truths left unsaid. And sometimes, Daniel realized, love survives in memories but dies in the spaces where transparency should exist. He walked toward the door slowly, pausing for a final look. Her expression was raw, filled with a mixture of regret, sadness, and understanding. Daniel didn't hate her. He didn't despise her. He simply felt the weight of reality pressing down. Love had existed between them, yes, but now it was over. Reshaped into a memory of what once was Dot as he stepped out into the night. The cool air wrapped around him, but it didn't cleanse the ache completely. Instead, it brought clarity. Every step away from her was both painful and freeing. He carried with him the knowledge that he had loved fully, deeply, and honestly. He carried the lessons of trust, heartbreak, and the slow erosion of closeness. And he carried the quiet hope that one day he would find a love that didn't leave him wondering about the spaces where honesty had been missing. That night, walking under the dim streetlights, Daniel understood something profound. Love doesn't always end with anger or dramatic moments. Sometimes it ends quietly in the small realizations. The slow accumulation of choices, the recognition that caring deeply doesn't always mean being able to stay. And in that quiet understanding, Daniel felt a strange sense of peace. Not happiness, not yet, but clarity, strength, the first step toward a new beginning, one where his heart could heal and trust again, in time.